All right. Welcome back, everybody. I'm so glad y'all could join me. I have a guest today. This is Sharon Garrett. She is one of my absolute best friends. She's my mentor. She is also my boss. And I'm so excited to have her with us today. We have a lot of conversations, and this week we were just having a conversation, and I thought, you know what? I want to have that conversation where you get to sit in on it, and hear just how we process and how we talk to God and how we wrestle things out with God. And so what we were talking about this week was the questions that we have about God. And in particular, we were talking about, like, why doesn't the Spirit fall on our church like we see him fall in the churches overseas? And we talked about, like, why doesn't God heal like we see him healing in the books that we read? But we've all asked why on so many more things that are more personal to us. Why me? Why my family? Why my child? Why? We ask that all the time. And it's not a bad question. I know sometimes we're really tempted to, like, go, oh, if you're a Christian, I shouldn't ask that because it's doubting God. And there's an element that's true to that. You can ask why and totally be doubting God. We see it in the Bible where people did that. But then we also see people who ask the question who were not doubting. What they weren't saying, God, I don't doubt that you can do these things. I don't doubt your ability. I just don't understand it. From my human point of view, I don't understand. And that's where we're coming from. We know God is sovereign. Nothing changes him. He is absolutely in control. We just lack the understanding as humans in our frailty to grasp the things of God. And it's okay to wrestle those things out. And so that's kind of where our conversation is. And I'm going to let Sharon just pick up and...
Well, one of my favorite stories in the Bible is the story of Jacob. And because Sarah used the word wrestling it out with God, I would say that absolutely defines 80% of my relationship with God, because I'm such a scrapper, and if I don't understand something, I'm just going to wrestle it out with him. And Jacob grabbed a hold of God, and he wrestled with him all night, and then he said, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. And it's always astounding to me that God blessed him. And so I tend to grab a hold of God and say, I am not going to let you go till you give me my answer. And not that he always gives me the answer I began with, to answer the question I began with, but he always gives me an understanding so that I can walk away understanding him better, with peace in my heart, and being okay. Sometimes he gives me my answer directly, but sometimes he just brings me to that place where I'm okay with not knowing the answer at that time. And so one of the questions, or one of the things I've struggled with lately, which is what prompted the whole discussion that Sarah and I had as we walked 3 miles, I might add, so I'm really proud of us, and we hope to repeat the experience. But I was like, why? To be honest, I was reading this book that really, on some levels, I would just call it kooky, and I was like, this has to be real, because no one in their right mind would make this crazy stuff up. And if God is willing to do all that crazy, weird stuff for them, and they weren't even looking for him, and I begged him to fill me with the Spirit, fill my church with the Spirit, and let us walk in power. We want to have that Acts kind of experience. And instead, what I ended up with a lot of times was kids struggling with addiction, rough spots in my marriage, challenges in my finances, putting it out there to start a ministry, and then just doing it in faith, and then finding myself in hard places, losing Owen, just then going, well, why would we end up with this batch of goods? And then these people over in Indonesia weren't even looking for you, and you fell on them in power. Why? What's the difference? And so what I noticed, and what I said to you, was that in the struggle of that, and after our conversation, I kept thinking about it, and the next morning, I felt that the Holy Spirit spoke to my heart and said, how about you stop looking horizontal and you begin to look vertical? Would you be as discontent with what I've given you, or what I've allowed in your life, if it was just you and me? You were on a desert island, there was no one to compare your life with, would you be dissatisfied? Because I'm your God, and don't I have the right to determine how I'm going to relate to you in your life? And so that kind of put me on a whole different level of thinking about it.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I think so many times, like, we ask our questions, but we ask them because we're comparing it against somebody else. Like, well, I'm having to do this. This is happening in my life. And then I look across the table and there's somebody and their life looks so perfect. And, they're not getting called out for all their stuff. And, like, I can't get away with anything without it being, like, public knowledge. And I'm just like, why, God? That's not even fair. And it's that tendency to compare that gets us in so much trouble, because what it does is it allows Satan to come in and slip those lies in. Because in that statement of, like, God, why me in that? What I am saying is, God, you're unfair and you're not being kind to me. And I somehow deserve more than what you're giving me. And none of those things are true. Now, if I say them like that, I'm like, well, that's not even true. But by comparing it and taking my eyes off of God and putting them on the other person, like, it's so easy for those just to slip in and not recognize them for what they are. And then I become discontent with God and what he has for me. Because the truth is, like, just talking about not being able to get away with things, like, I specifically told God, please don't let anything in my life be hidden. Like, that has been my prayer for me and my family. And so by taking my eyes off of him, he's answering that prayer specifically, just as I asked it. Like, he's doing that. And then I'm looking at somebody else who's getting away with it and being discontent with God, when I should be, like, so amazed that God's like, I got you.
Well, and also it starts with discontent, but let me tell you, it is toxic, because that can go straight into a deep-rooted bitterness at God, especially if you are really putting it out there and you have paid some prices, and maybe you aren't doing it the world's way, and your family isn't bowing down to the gods of our culture, and then, like, your child ends up with cancer, and some godless, hateful person you've had to deal with, their kid just is perfectly healthy and not having to struggle. It can create, when we're looking horizontal, it can create an incredible discontent that goes more deep-rooted into a bitterness, when we really have to realize, if we will keep it vertical, if we will keep our attention on God's faithfulness to us, we have to realize that to those people, to those of us who have actually committed at a deeper level with God, he will absolutely bring harder things into our lives, because we've asked him to sanctify us. We've asked him to trust us with his power. We've asked him to let us do great things. We just didn't know that it would look like this.
It's exactly true. I mean, I know for both of us that we've said, God, like, I'm laying it all on the line for you. Nothing is off limits, and I want you. And we were just ignorant when we said it, because
Exactly.
In your head, you think that looks like all the glamorous stuff, like you're going to go preach to thousands and nothing is ever going to go wrong. And it's just blessing upon blessing. And the reality of it is that there's a lot of valleys between those blessings, because he's got to iron the you out of you.
We don't realize the level of pride we actually have.
It's true.
And we know how to act humble, but to actually live in humility has nothing to do with other people at all. It has everything to do with, will we trust God? The deepest form of pride is when I look at God and I measure what I've done for him against what he's done for me. And of course, who could ever really know the truth of that, because I'm on such a physical level. And so God's eternal. So when I go to God and I say, I've done this, but my kids ended up here, my this, my that, I'm accusing God. And there's such an arrogance to that. And I'm guilty. And I'm not even saying I don't fall prey to that still.
Right.
But when I get discontent is when I compare myself horizontally to others. And I look at, and I'm like, well, look what I'm doing. Why am I not living the glorious life? Why am I struggling with this? And then I realize that's God's right. if I've really given it to him. But you know, we're not alone in this, because as I was struggling through this week, Peter came to my mind. I mean, when Jesus said, Peter, do you love me? Mm-hmm. And he said, you know I love you, Lord. I'm your guy, Lord. You know, I can so relate to Peter. And so God said, do you love me? Lord, you know it. Do you love me? God, you know I love you, Jesus. He said, feed my sheep. When you were young, you got to do what you wanted to do. But when you're old, you're going to do something you don't want to do. You're going to spend your whole life serving me, and then you're going to die. And he told him how he was going to die. What was his first response?
What about John?
Well, what about him? Because, you know, he's your favorite. Obviously, he's, you know what I'm saying? And we do this because we're like, well, why this? Why that? And we don't just rest in the trust of it, of saying, I trust you with the plan of my life.
It's so true, and it limits us when we start comparing to others and we let other people into the equation. It limits what we're willing to do for God. Because, I mean, we'll pray like, God, I want to be filled with your spirit. I want to do for you. Like, I want all of these things. And then we're like, well, what would that look like to so-and-so? What are they going to think of me? Like, and then we take that step back from God that we just, you know, said, like, I want this. And he's like, okay. And then we're like, hold on. I only want it if it looks like this. If you can fit it into that box, like, I'm game. But don't make me look stupid. Don't make me look like a Jesus freak. And
we really are such lightweights.
We really
because
are.
When you read the Kooky book, he said, you know what? When the power of God falls, the persecution comes. Well, we don't even want to look stupid, let alone one of the stories in there. It's gruesome. If your kids are in the room, close their ears. But a guy did this powerful thing, led these people to the Lord, and then he was traveling to the next, and they all got together and got angry with him, cut both of his arms off, and then cut his head off. Well, I'm not even worried about that. I just don't want them to think I'm a dork.
Don't whisper behind my back.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh my gosh, she's so weird. You know, we're all in for Jesus as long as we can keep our dignity, and we can keep our pride, and we can look good, and we can be respected, right? So it's just, God knows the truth of where we are in our hearts.
It's true. You know, I do my soap every morning, and I'm in Acts right now. And so I was reading where like they like anointed Paul and Barnabas and like sent them out to do the work, right? And I'm like, I want that, God. Like, why don't we do all of that stuff? Like, or why isn't somebody saying like, this is your calling? You know, let me lay hands on you and pray for you and send you out and heal the sick and raise the dead. Like, I want to do those things. And then like as I'm reading it, it's like they were so effective in their speech, right? And they were winning people for Christ. And then here are the Pharisees coming right up behind him, and they're like just the voice of opposition continuously, you know. And it's just like they're talking about them, they're negating everything that they're saying. They're like, nope, that ain't true, right? And they're plotting their deaths. And you just see them, like you see Paul and Barnabas, they just pick up and they move to the next place. And the next place, like Paul gets stoned. And they think he's dead. And he just gets up and like takes a night's rest and goes to the next place and to do it all again. And then they go back into every one of those places. And like, it's so easy because you read that in, you know, one little setting and you're like, yeah, I want that, without actually realizing they suffered. They were persecuted. They did really amazing things. And it cost them so much.
Well, and we were talking, and I was like, you know, if we had been was it Peter? Who was it that ended up, Paul and Silas in the prison that they got beat? Okay, we were talking about, okay, so if that was me and Sarah and we ended up in prison, I'd be like, instead of that, they were singing praises to God and they were like worshiping God, and I'd be like, how deep is it? How bad is it? I would be so focused on the beating and the stripes and what it cost me that I would not be praising God.
Oh, it's so
in the
true.
reality of, we live in the theory of it, but the reality of it is God's like, you got a ways to go, child. You got a ways to go, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like Paul and Barnabas, they get back to Antioch and they're like, look what God did. I would get back and I would be like, look at the bruises. Look, this is what they did to me.
Look what I've done. And God has not blessed me, you know?
It's the difference between being vertical and being horizontal. Because anytime that you start looking around, that's all you're going to see is your circumstances. That's all you can see.
It's so true.
From our human standpoint. So it is like we're counting every bruise and every bad word and every pitfall and every burden that we're carrying. And at some point, I don't care how strong you are, how strong in the faith you are, it's too much. You get to, like, everybody has their breaking point, and you're just like, I can't do this.
It's so true.
And that's where the discontentment and the bitterness comes in that turns people away from God, is they stop looking to him. And I think the most horrible part of it is when we start looking horizontal and we stop looking vertically, is we miss God. Like, because he says, if you draw near to me, I draw near to you. And that's not a, like, if you do it absolutely perfect. It's like, if you draw near, that's all it requires. And like, we've done that much. I want God. I'm again, often ignorant when I say that I do it. I don't know what that looks like.
So true.
But I do want him. And he says, I'm right here. And I don't see him 9 times out of 10, unless it's the big things. I'm missing God on a daily basis. And that's like, it just really, like, it's so disappointing and hurtful in my heart to think that, like, here God is moving in every part of my life every single day, and I'm oblivious to him. Like, one of my biggest fears is being just unnoticed, like being invisible, feeling like you're just walking through life and nobody sees you. And to think that I do that to God every single day is just like, it's devastating.
Well, you know, I feel like sometimes in our humanness of living life, we belong to God. We want him. I think a lot of us experience this, and then we don't understand why God does certain things, and when we can't figure it out, what we do, and I think our culture is very prone to creating an environment that it's easy to do this. We get busy, and if it's a painful, hard thing to have to try to wrestle through with God, we'll stuff it, and the busyness of our lives will numb that out, but it's there. I had an experience recently where I've gone through some really tough things, and I just picked up a book. It was Lisa TerKeurst. It's Not Supposed to Be This Way. And I'm like, I love her. She's very transparent. And so I began to read the book, and my reaction to that book shocked me. I mean, there was stuff that started coming up in my heart. I started it one night really late, and I got so upset reading that. I did not go to sleep like for hours, and I was like, why am I reacting to this? And I realized it as I worked. I had to put it down. I waited a week. I read it a little more. I had that reaction. So then I had to just get real with God, and I had to sit down and say, why am I reacting to this? I thought I had dealt with all of this. But it was that very thing. Unanswered questions that I stuffed and covered with the busyness of ministry. Yes, I read my Bible every day. Yes, I taught my Sunday school class. Yes, I continued to help people along the way. But the busyness of my life and the fullness of my life physically, I had stuffed down some unresolved issues with God that I had numbed out to, that I didn't even realize were there. But in his love, he's going to not let that stay there. And so in reading that book, it brought all this up. And a lot of it was rooted in comparison. It was rooted in the fact that I'm like, why did you require this of me? Why didn't you bless me? Because look at this sacrifice, look at that sacrifice. But here's what I've come to, and here's where I found some healing for my heart. And I think it's true for maybe a lot of people watching us today. We have to understand that God is so personal to each of us. God is so personal. And if we really want to walk it out with him, we have to trust him to handle us his way. In my case, it's trying so hard and so many things, and then watching my kids have struggles, things not turning out the way that I thought they should. Maybe there's multiple things we could add on. In your case, it's losing Owen. We can really look and we can say, well, why did you require that of her? And why do you not require that of this person? Why does this person blah, 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 blah? The questions are endless, but the truth is, he's a personal God. He has a personal plan, and he's 100% vertical. He is all about us. He is all about his agenda for us, and that is going to look so different for each and every one of us, and we have to accept the fact that if he chooses it for us, it's part of his plan. It's not an accident. It's not a vote of lack of confidence. It's not a, you're not good enough, you don't measure up. It's a very intimate connection with a very personal God, with a very individualized plan that he's working for you, for me, for you. You know, and we just have to learn how to trust him with that, because only then can we navigate these really hurtful, hard things and come out the victor and get what God's after in us and avoid letting the enemy hijack our lives.
Yeah, it's so true. I think it's so important that we come to God with these things, because again, the whole temptation is to stuff it and say, I shouldn't feel that way. I shouldn't be resentful towards God. But there's no healing when we refuse to be honest, because God says, like, I'm going to help you through all these things. And I do have a plan. And it was a plan. It wasn't even a plan that, like, he's reacting to, like, oh, I didn't see that coming, so, like, let me put something in place. Like, before we were born, before, the world existed, he already had your name, and he knew your life, and he had already said, this will happen, I will allow this to happen. And he's built everything about us with that in mind. And so, so many times I think that we come and we're like, that's too much. You said you wouldn't give us more than we can handle, and that's too much. And the truth of it is everything is more than what we can handle if you take God out of the equation. But when he created you and he drew your life out in its completion, he did it with him standing right there with you every step of the way. And when we forget to look towards God, we're just going to have, like, disappointment upon disappointment. And coming back to God gives God that opportunity to go, nope, I'm right here. Like, this is the circumstances. I see what you're seeing, but you're not seeing what I see.
It's so true. And even to add in on that, sometimes for me, I know I've experienced where it's not even that I'm not honest with God, it's that I'm not even able to handle or understand what's going on in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And even that's a process that God's in control of. Like, sometimes I don't even understand, and so it's not a matter of not being honest. But here's one real true sign. Anytime we're dealing with something, and it's just like we have a strong emotional reaction to it. That's not something we should walk away from and stuff. Right. That's something we need to go, hey God, I don't know. I'm not trying to lie to you. I don't know. Why am I reacting this way? Or what's making this? I don't think I'm the only person that God has hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
Like, in the moments, like, that really hurts my feelings. I don't understand. Why did this happen? And a lot of times I'm like, I'm just too busy to think about it. But anytime we have an emotional reaction, it could be fear, hurt, you name it. It can be big or small. That's where we need to stop. We need to camp right there, and we need to wrestle that out with God until we get clarity, because you can know that in those places, the enemy will begin to try to speak his lies and get a foothold into our thinking. And so the worst thing we can do is just stuff it, because in essence, when we do that, we're leaving a crack in our armor that the enemy, who is a roaring lion looking for whom he may devour, is going to try to find. And so we just have to truly be a little self-aware when we're dealing with things like that, and just say, okay, I'm not trying to lie to you. I just frankly do not know.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, again, just being able to come to God and just say exactly what it is. There's been so many times in my own life where I just have to acknowledge this is where I'm at. And then on the tail end of that, I have to say, and I am powerless to get over it. I mean, in dealing with hate, I remember there was a season and there was a person that I particularly, like, I can just say, I know hated is a strong word, but it fit. Like, I hated them. And nothing was going to change that outside of God. And it took me going to God and going, it wouldn't bother me if tomorrow they were gone. My life would be better for it. And just acknowledging, that's me, that's where I am, but I know that it's wrong, and I give you full permission to make it right. It took him like a year to get me from there to where I could see them through his eyes. And then now we're in the process. I'm like, God, I don't hate them anymore, but I still don't want to be their friend. Like, don't make me be personal with them, right? And just acknowledging, God, like, I'm not putting you in any box. If that's where you want me, you know my heart, and you know that I'm incapable, and you're just gonna have to do it. And I think anytime that we open ourselves so wide up to God, like, he never disappoints. It's easy to miss it in the moment because it's not something that just happens with the flip of a switch. Like, again, it took him a year to get to where I was like, oh, I think I could see that person in Walmart and, not be undone. And if I had stopped at any time before then, I would have said, no, I don't think anything's changed. Like, I knew the change the moment that I did run into them. And my reaction was not my reaction. There was God. I mean, he had worked it. It wasn't like that he worked it right in that moment. He worked it over a year's time. I just didn't see it in that because it was so subtle. But it starts with just saying, like, I want you. I want your ways. And I can't do it on my own.
It's so
and
true.
Just opening that door to him. By opening the door to him, we close it to Satan. He can't use what we're willing to say. You're right. Like,
it's so true.
That's me, and I can't even deny it. But God loves me anyways, and I've handed that over to him. So if you don't like it, you need to go to him because we're on the same page on this.
It's so true. It's agreeing with God and understanding, like, what we think needs to happen in situations is not always God. You said earlier about God being eternal. God has an eternal vision. I have a temporal vision. I'm the 2-year-old that wants the sucker at 9:30 at night. And God's like, no, that's going to keep you up, and that's not good for you. And God's like, no, I'm after the big picture. I'm after the eternal vision. And God wants things for us that we would never want for ourselves because we can't comprehend what that is going to be. And so many times we're like, God, you need to remove this person, or you need to do this. I have a situation in my life right now that with one of my kids, and it's just a kind of a new experience because I always know what I want, right? And I am very opinionated. So I pray very like that. And of course, I always end it with your will, not mine. Well, I've had this new experience that every time I go to pray, there is a particular thing I think needs to happen with one of my kids. And so every time I go to pray, I've started praying, Lord, and I'm going to pray this, but what comes out of my mouth instead is, help this child to fall in love with Jesus. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's what I want to pray, but I really still, can't I add this on? And God's like, no, I'm not going to let you pray that right now because this is what you need to pray. And so every time that I go to pray it, I check myself and I'm like, let him fall in love with Jesus. Let him love Jesus. Because God knows that eternally, and even for his purposes here, which eternally is yesterday, today, and forever,
right.
He knows what needs to happen for what that child really needs. And I think, well, this would fix it. And he's like, no, Jesus will fix it. And I think so many times, as we're struggling through the humanity of it with our perspective, God loves us enough to absolutely interfere in a way we might not agree with in that given moment. But he's always after our good, and he's always going to work his plan if we'll cooperate with him.
Yeah. And I think, something you said is key when we're talking about all of this, the comparison and looking vertically to God rather than horizontally to men. And it's the falling in love with Jesus. That changes everything. I mean, even when we're like sold out and we want God, we tend to come to him with all of our baggage, and we're like, this is what I need. And like it becomes, and this is what I think about it. And he loves those conversations. I really think he does. But what we miss in that is experiencing God. because it's just like, the difference between going to the lake and hanging out with you all day and sitting in a meeting with you all day, right? Like, I love you either way, but I'd much rather spend the time
We're
on the
gonna
lake
laugh
with
a
you.
lot more on the lake.
And so I think that's it. We tend to we come to God and it's business, and He wants it to be relationship. There's so much, if we just truly grasp the love of God and we fell in love with Him, that life would be so much different. I mean, it's the difference between looking at us struggling with all the hardships as we follow God and looking in the Bible and seeing the guys that they're just like, and onward, and we'll sing as we go. Like, it's that vertical, like, I know my God and He's so good and I don't care what it costs me. Like, you need to know Him too.
I love that.
Relationship.
It makes me think too, like what you just said is, when was the last time, this is a true question I'm asking you, when was the last time you laughed with God? Have you ever? I don't know that I have. Like, maybe way a long time ago. We just were so serious.
It's enough that we don't remember if it's happened.
That's exactly right. So, like, then people will be like, are we supposed to laugh with God? Yes, I think we are. We're supposed to do life with Him, just like we're doing life with one another, and that time we spend in that depth of conversation and that depth of life experience, it's so often the very things we think God is betraying us on are the very things that bring that depth of understanding. I think about our relationship. I've always loved you. You've come to church forever. You were in my Sunday school class forever. And we had a lot of conversations. The conversations we've had that brought the depth of relationship we have today were always some form of struggle. Mm-hmm. You were having a struggle, you would come to me and we would talk through it. I was having a struggle, I would come to you, we would talk through it. But nothing can compare to the depth of relationship we've had since we experienced the loss of Owen together. And just going through that, the hardest thing in the entire world, and that transparency and that depth, it's no different with God. God is not willing for our life to be so rosy that we never get some depth with Him. And it truly, I hate to say it, it's not the hanging out on the lake that makes us close. That's a perk.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't enjoy hanging out on the lake if we didn't have the depth. Because then it would be an awkward, what are we going to talk about?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so with God, we want to keep it awkward because we want to keep it clean and easy. And we want Him to perform the way we want Him to. But it is only in the depth of a struggle that we have the relationship with God, that when we're hanging out on the lake with Him, we can laugh.
It's true. It is so true. And I think, once you start drawing really near to God, and you start having those conversations and you get to know Him and experience Him as not just God, but as your God and somebody that you care deeply about, it changes how you hear Him. And it struck me the other day, I was reading that Lisa's book, It's Not Supposed to Be That Way, and it talks about, when Adam and Eve were in the garden and they sin, and then they go and they hide themselves. And when God comes and he asks that question, why are you hiding? They're like, because we're naked. And He says, who told you were naked? And in my head, I've always read that in more of an accusing tone. It kind of like the principal is calling you in. He's just interrogating you
to find out why they sinned.
Right. Yeah. And then it hit me in that's not what God was saying at all. He was saying, who told you that lie? Who's making you feel this way? And it's that love and that protectiveness that's who? What? Not that He didn't know the answer, but this isn't true of you. That's not what you were just fine. And it changes that, because then I realize a lot of times, we believe so many lies because we're looking horizontally, right? And we're listening to what other people are saying, and God's coming back behind and He's going, who's telling you this? It's a lie. But we miss that because we just hear, who told you that, right? In that accusatory tone. And then it's well, now I'm getting it from God too. And we miss His heart because we haven't had that depth of relationship, that we don't hear the pain and the protectiveness and the love in his voice when he goes, who? Like, who would dare, to speak to you that way or to treat you that way? You're mine.
Hey guys, I hope that you enjoyed Sharon and I's talk this past week. I really enjoyed it. When we finished it, we kind of realized that, maybe other people, or I guess it's not a maybe, like we know that other people struggle with questions in their life and how to make God's word and his promises relevant to us today. And so we were just brainstorming, how can we do that? The videos are good, but it lacks that ability to personally connect with you. And so we have this idea that maybe like we have a session once a month or so where we can together, like we can all get together and talk about life, talk about the questions that are most relevant to you, the things that pain your heart or that you're struggling with, or the answers that you found. And so I'm going to be posting a link for a survey to this video, or if I can figure out how to do it, I'm going to do that. And if it's something that interests you, I want you to fill it out. Let us know, like, yeah, I would be interested in that, and these are the times that would work best, and these are the topics that are weighing on my heart. Because again, we want to come together and discuss those things as God's children. Like, his answers are always relevant. There's nothing that we're going through that we can't find in his word. It may not have our name attached to it, but I promise you the principle is there, and we want to have the opportunity to dig into that together and find our answers and learn to trust him with his word and his truth. So just be looking for that. And again, I hope that you enjoyed the video this week and that it blessed you, and just have a great week, and I hope to see you really soon.